doing three things this afternoon. So first of all, we're going to hear from each of your groups about the priority areas you've begun to identify for where you may make recommendations as an assembly. Then secondly, I'm going to talk through the process that we're proposing for developing recommendations. And then finally, for the remainder of this afternoon, you're going to be starting the process of developing those recommendations for the two topics that we've looked at this weekend. And just to remind you of the questions for those two topics. So the first, which focuses around existing houses, is how should Scotland change its existing homes to tackle the climate emergency in an effective and fair way? And the second question that you've been looking at this morning, which relates to new homes, how should Scotland change how it builds new homes to tackle the climate emergency in an effective and fair way? So first of all, as I said, we're going to come to each of your groups to hear the sorts of areas that you've identified as priorities where you may choose to make recommendations. So I'm going to run through the groups. So starting with what we focused on yesterday around existing homes, I'm going to go to group 6 first. I understand, John, you're going to present from group 6. Are you there, John? Can you hear us?
Yes, am I unmuted?
Yes, that's great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, fine. I'll get started right away. Well, first of all, with the existing housing stock, it's to make a start on this and to be most efficient and fair and effective. We felt that prioritizing those in fuel poverty and the biggest emitters, that's where to really start it. And as a result of that, once this is completed, to do away with the existing rating value, and to create perhaps something similar to a kite mark, which would value the changes made in the properties. And perhaps this could be used to lower the rateable value of the property than what it would be if it didn't have that kite mark. That's on existing houses. Should I go right ahead with the new?
So we'll come back to new houses in a little while.
Fine.
Run through the groups for existing homes. So thank you very much for that, John, and group 6. So next we'll go to Sharon and group 7.
I think Sharon has just entered the room now, Tim, so you might just need a second.
Okay, so shall we move on to group 8 instead then? And is it Graham for that group or Green? Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that.
That's okay. Hello?
Hi,
you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Right, we looked back to some of us who are old enough looked back to the 1970s and 1980s when 95% grants were made available to upgrade most domestic property in Scotland, not just tenement flats, but also semi-detached properties as well. And we thought that this should be reconsidered in the light of retrofitting existing domestic properties. We understood from the information we gained was that the average cost of retrofitting a house to passive house standard is around £25,000. So if we looked at that would cost about £5 billion to do for Scotland's most of Scotland's housing stock. So if government was to give a grant of 100% grant towards this, providing say £500 million a year, then within 10 years we could basically have the whole housing stock to a standard. We would include a condition of that there was statutory notices so that basically a property would not be mortgageable unless it had the passive, it had been retrofitted to a passive house standard. There are also huge economic benefits to communities for all the work which would be involved in this. There would be an opportunity for new training and development, and also it would end fuel poverty.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. So, so next up, we'll move on to Group 9 and Marion.
Hi. We discussed as a group something similar in the fact it was affordability. We felt that this should be heavily subsidised for people who can't afford it, and the facility should be easier to access and physical help given to people who physically can't do it.
That's great. Thank you, Marion and Group 9. So next we'll move to Group 10 and Laura. Laura, I think you might be muted.
So we looked at, for existing houses, information or education or raising awareness of all the different options available. We know the information's there if you know where to look, but it can be difficult to find if you don't know what you're looking for. So ensuring this advice and advisory support is independent, not linked to companies, and it needs to be relevant to local authority, climate and housing types in that area.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Laura and Group 10. So we'll come back to Group 7 and Sharon.
Hi. Yeah, we looked at the standard access assessment procedure, and we felt that the regulations need to be a lot tighter, so that homeowners can upgrade to the same standard. It's got to be a set standard, and we also felt that we should make sure that refit is a better first time option, because there is a lot of old houses sitting empty, sitting derelict, that could be refitted. And like you say, if we can do 6 of those to the comparison of 1 new build, we felt that that would be a great way to go forward.
Great, thank you very much, Sharon and Group 7. So lots of fantastic ideas already there around the existing housing stock. So next we'll move to new homes and hear from each of the groups some of the ideas you've been developing there. So I'll start back with Group 6 again. So John, I think it's you again.
Yes, our concentration was to think about looking at existing communities for the focus, the initial focus, because existing communities already have established existing amenities and infrastructure. So we don't have to worry about building that on. Forget about greenfield sites. Go into your city centers, your town centers, your villages, make use of buildings which are no longer commercially viable, and try to build around this infrastructure. And in that way, you'll already have your sense of community there. So we think that's the area to focus first concentration on and funding.
Great, thanks very much, John and Group 6. So then let's come to Group 7 and Aidan.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, we had a look at, again, it was social development and housing, what we have at the moment and where it can be redefined, as well as looking into new planning roles as well when rebuilding social housing, as well as having a community involvement during the development process, looking at like 20-minute communities again. And I think one that was well received was taking away the stigma of social housing as well, when putting them into comparison with sort of new built and existing flats as well. So again, just ensuring the best sort of units in development.
Fantastic, thank you, Aidan and Group 7. So next up, it's James from Group 8.
Hi, good afternoon. There's a lot of good ideas came from the videos within the group, and there was questions that we came up with. How do we ensure that the homes are built to a high standard at scale? It's going to be a massive building programme, refit programme, and probably more importantly, how does it remain affordable to the people? So we come up with some suggestions. It was make them LBTT duty exempt, provide tax exemptions, grants. There's also if planning systems, planning projections are based on the new housing standards, should we be getting the planning systems themselves, the planning permissions, to be a speed process to allow them to hurry through rather than waiting 2, 3, 4 years if they're building to these new high standards?
That's great. Thank you, James and Group 8. So next we'll come to Group 9 and Suzanne.
Hi, yes, like a couple of the other groups, we picked up on the fact that yesterday Chris Morgan said that the system used to comply with building regulations, SAP, which is what generates the energy performance certificates you get in your home report, is not very accurate, and that there's a mismatch between what that requires and what an energy efficient home actually looks like. So today, when we heard Clive Wilding from Artisan Real Estate talk about kite mark benchmarking, we thought that might be a better alternative, and that could measure all aspects of an energy efficient, sustainable home. Maybe consumers who were made familiar with that could use that to drive the building developers to improve. So we'd like to see that explored as an alternative to the standard assessment procedure, as the approved methodology for comparing the environmental performance of residential properties. But we're also very concerned to explore ways to prevent further bad housing development dominated by a small number of volume builders. So, you know, this is like peripheral estate, eating up green fields, acres of tarmac. We thought this might involve changes to planning regulation and legislation to encourage better communities, possibly based on the active building centre solutions suggested by Hugh Lloyd.
Fantastic. Thanks, Suzanne and Group 9. So last but not least, I think we have a double act with Richard and Callum from Group 10.
That without accurate and reliable information, it was difficult to be prescriptive about the way forward. However, I think we agreed that a kite mark on new builds and retrofits reflected sustainability across the piece would be a useful development. One proposed aspect of sustainability was the concept of well-being, and on such there was less consensus within the group. However, the expression that nature-based solutions to mitigating climate change are integral to achieving net zero receives some support, and such nature-based solutions could include wildlife corridors and ecological opportunities by green roofs, as well as making or increasing availability of allotments for a much larger portion of the urban population. The idea that one should replace by 3 saplings was also refuted. That may fit with the economic interest of the developer, but certainly doesn't harmonise with the fundamental link between biodiversity and climate change.
Can I I'll maybe take over from Richard there, because his voice is breaking up there. It's quite difficult to hear. So I hope you can hear me. Can you?
Yeah, we can hear you, Callum.
So I think what Richard was trying to get across there, but he broke up, was that like the other groups, we liked the idea of the kite mark, but the feature that we liked about it was that it expanded beyond just energy efficiency and took into account biodiversity, external spaces, and health and well-being issues, as well as just energy efficiency and carbon emissions. So that aspect of the kite mark was quite important to our group. And what he was saying at the start about that was the need for us to get more reliable data and information for us to make decisions on. One of the problems that's emerged with the SAP calculations is that the data that is completely unreliable, and you can't develop a policy unless you've got reliable information.
Great, thanks very much, Callum, and thanks, Richard, as well. And Richard, your connection was breaking up a little bit, so I think, caught kind of some of what you were saying, but not all. So if there's anything you want to add, then please do add it in the chat, perhaps. So clearly, lots of fantastic ideas already across the groups for areas where you may choose to focus your recommendations as an assembly. So next up, just wanted to introduce you to our kind of proposed approach for developing those recommendations, which we're going to start off this afternoon. So I'm going to share some slides with you, which I'll briefly talk through. So I want to start by just taking you back to right to the beginning and the remit of the Assembly. So the Climate Change Act 2019 calls for the Citizen Assembly to make recommendations on measures to achieve Scotland's emissions reductions targets, and in line with the question we've been given to do this in an effective and fair way. So in order to do
Tim,
this,
we're not seeing any slides, just to let you know,
what's
in
going on?
case you think we are.
Technical issues at my end, sorry about that. So let's see if this works instead. There we go. Hopefully you should now see the remit in front of you.
Yes.
Great, okay, I'm getting some thumbs up, sorry about that.
I can only see a small version of it on the right hand side.
How's it showing up for others? Are you getting a bigger
And then
picture?
it says immersive online experiences are on Zoom.
Harriet, I'll give you a quick ring.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Juliet. So yeah, I was just kind of referring to the remit for the Assembly, and particularly around kind of making recommendations on measures proposed to achieve the emissions reductions targets. So in order to do this, you've already spent almost 3 weekends learning about the current situation and exploring avenues for making change, and including in the last couple of days hearing about some specific proposals that people are arguing as the best ways forward. And so for our topic, those focused, as you've heard, around the existing housing stock and new homes as well. So we are now at the beginning of the process for creating recommendations that will be voted on by all of the Assembly members and then included in the Assembly's report to the Scottish Parliament. And this is going to be a multi-stage process. In some sense, you've started it already by the work that you've done, but the next kind of step of it this afternoon will be where you kind of really delve into where those recommendations are best focused. So we recognise that some of you might have been a bit frustrated that you've not been able to kind of jump straight into finding solutions. But we hope that the different lenses we've been bringing to the problem have been valuable for you in kind of opening up the sorts of kind of potential recommendations that you could choose to focus on. So from a change at kind of individual level through kind of policy and institutional changes to whole-scale systemic changes to the norms and expected structures of society. So kind of thinking back to the kind of rainbow kind of structure that you've been looking at the different levels. From now on, it's up to you to kind of decide where those recommendations are going to be best focused. So in order to do this, the first step this afternoon, you're going to be identifying the types of recommendation that you want to make to address the first 2 questions that we're focusing on as a theme. So both looking at existing homes and new homes as well. And then next weekend or weekend 4, we will come to the other topics that we will be focusing on around communities. So we're going to be doing this by using a standard template across all of the groups and then all of the streams as well. And so the idea of this is that it helps to ensure that the recommendations are developed in a consistent way. So this next slide introduces you to that template that we'll be working on this afternoon. And this one says diet in the top left-hand corner. Ignore that. Yours will be focused around homes. And so this afternoon, we're going to be getting you to think through a number of different questions to help to kind of focus your recommendations. So the first of those is kind of thinking back to what is the challenge, the issue, or the problem you're seeking to address. So you've already had a lot of discussion around that, particularly in response to the first presentations you heard on each of the topics. Then we're going to be asking you to think about what your proposed recommendation is trying to achieve. So thinking about the purpose behind it, what will change because of it. Then we're going to also ask you to think about what type of action are you suggesting? So is this about tax incentives? Is it about new regulation? Is it about government investments? All the sorts of things that you've started to consider. What's the kind of specific action that you're going to be suggesting to help to achieve kind of the, I guess, what you're setting out to achieve? And then the final three questions that you see here around kind of who needs to take action. And so thinking to, I guess, the rainbow kind of document or kind of templates and the sorts of, I guess, actors and institutions that might be able to take action to achieve this. Considerations related to fairness. Fairness is a really important aspect of the assembly question, so anything that relates to fairness. And finally, other considerations as well. So this afternoon, you'll have the opportunity to develop a number of these in each of your groups across the two different topics that we've been focusing on this weekend. So once we've done that this weekend, there will be a little bit that happens between this weekend and the fourth weekend. So the first of those things is that there will be a process of consolidation. So it's quite likely that across your groups, some similar ideas are going to emerge. So we will, between the weekends, kind of look at what you've proposed, and where there are ideas that are very similar, they may be blended together into one proposal. So we'll only do this if you've identified the same problem and the same solution. So it might be that you've used kind of slightly different words around it, but if it's essentially getting at the same thing, then we will kind of likely kind of suggest bringing those two proposals together. But of course, if a group has maybe identified the same problem, but you've identified different ways of solving it, in that case, they'll remain separate proposals. So we're only proposing that we do this where ideas are very similar. The second thing that we'll kind of be looking to do between the weekends is using our evidence leads to help to refine the ideas from kind of more of a technical perspective. So you've spent a lot of time learning about the climate emergency and the Scottish context in relation to climate change. But no one expects you to be kind of experts at this stage in the layers of governments and the different powers that they hold and policy making protocols and things like this. So that's why we're inviting the expert leads to review what you come up with this weekend, and to help then to propose how they can be best targeted at the appropriate institutions to be able to respond. So this is about ensuring that what you're kind of setting out to achieve with your recommendation, that can be kind of best targeted at who can make that change. So just to give you kind of a couple of examples of what that could look like. So it might be that one of your groups perhaps proposes that there's a change to legislation to achieve a particular purpose. But in the process of technical refinement, it might be identified that that legislation isn't, or I guess doesn't matter, or isn't the thing that's holding up the issue. And so the evidence leads might propose back to you that it could be better dealt with through policy or regulation or something else instead. And so they'll suggest some wording back to you in that case. Or you might, through developing the kind of recommendation frameworks, make a recommendation that local government should do something, but actually it might not be something where local government holds the power to do it, and in which case this is the sort of thing where the evidence leads will then flag that and suggest that the recommendation might be directed better elsewhere, and give you the option then to to do that. So this is really about kind of helping you to refine the proposals that you come up with. So that's what we've proposed that kind of happens between this weekend and the fourth weekend. Then at the fourth weekend, we'll be repeating the process for our second theme around communities. So what you've done yesterday afternoon and this morning, we'll be doing again for the topics of communities. And then on the Sunday morning, we'll be working up the frameworks that you'll be kind of similar to this afternoon. You'll be doing the same again for the topic of communities. But then at the end of weekend 4, we'll be returning to the work that you'll be doing this afternoon, and returning to essentially kind of looking at where the proposals or recommendations might have been consolidated, and also returning to that technical refinement as well. So within each of the streams, you'll have the opportunity to review the proposed recommendations collectively. So you'll get to see what all of your groups have put forward as proposed recommendations. You'll then have the opportunity to kind of review those and ensure that the proposed recommendation meets kind of your intent, so what you're trying to achieve. And then as a whole group, you'll make the decision over kind of which recommendation should be proposed to the whole assembly for consideration. So that then takes us through to weekend 5. So weekend 5 will repeat that process again for the communities topic. So you'll again have the opportunity to review the recommendations from across all of your groups, and how they've been consolidated, and that kind of technical refinements. And we'll also be looking at developing supporting statements for each of the recommendations. So these are kind of statements around why you believe the recommendation is important, fair and effective, and kind of really kind of helping to make the case for why these recommendations should be introduced. Then at weekend 5 as well, so I think on the Sunday of weekend 5, you'll be presenting your kind of proposed recommendations at that stage to the whole assembly for some discussion and debate. And we'll particularly at this point be looking for where there are commonalities of approach across the recommendations, so perhaps areas where things can be combined. We'll also be looking for where there may be kind of inconsistencies or contradictions between recommendations, and kind of looking for ways to resolve those. And where needed, we'll be looking at how to address different trade-offs that need to be made. So weekend 5 is where you'll get the opportunity to also see what the other groups focusing around diets and transport have been developing as well. And then finally, weekend 6 is where we will review all of the proposed recommendations, and again, kind of assessing them for any kind of contradictions and gaps and wider opportunities. But perhaps most importantly, it's where you as an assembly will be voting on the recommendations to hopefully endorse them, and then they will be reported in the final report. So that's the process that we're proposing. There'll be more opportunity to discuss the process and suggest any revisions to it at weekend 4. But I'm also going to be available during the rest of this afternoon. So as you get into that process of developing the recommendations, if you want to ask me any questions about how that's going to work, then I'm happy to drop into your groups and do that. And we'll also share with you a document that kind of outlines all of this, so you'll be able to look at it in a bit more detail between the weekends as well, and send feedback if you have any. So that's what we're proposing for developing the recommendations. As I said, that all starts this afternoon. And essentially from kind of this point forward, for the rest of the afternoon, you're going to be digging into each of those topics around the home, and in your small groups developing where you want to kind of focus your recommendations. So we will come back for a kind of 5-minute wrap up at the very end of today. But for up until then, it's going to be over to your facilitators in your groups to kind of lead you through that process for the rest of this afternoon. So it's time to open the breakout rooms. And as I said, if you've got any questions that you want to pick up immediately, then I'm happy to join your groups. But otherwise, there'll be more time to discuss this at the next weekend. So if we could open the breakout groups. Okay, welcome back everyone. So I know it's the end of a long day and a long weekend. Just a few kind of final bits and pieces to go over with you, and then we'll let you on your way. So first of all, I want to say a big thank you to all of you for all of your kind of energy and ideas over the weekend. I've been having a look through some of what you've been producing. It looks fantastic. So thank you for your engagement and yeah, your kind of efforts to do that. So just for a quick reminder of what's going to happen next. So everything that you've produced this afternoon, as I said earlier, we'll take it away. If any consolidation needs to happen between groups, if you've got very similar ideas, then we'll do that. And the expert leads will also then do their kind of technical kind of analysis as well, and kind of feed in some thoughts on that. And all of that will be brought back to you to have a look at the next weekend, weekend 4. So at the next weekend, which is in 2 weeks' time, we'll be looking at the topic of communities. So you'll go through a similar process again of hearing some more evidence, having those discussions, and then working up your recommendations for communities as well. So in the next few minutes, around about 4 o'clock, you'll have an email arriving with you, which will have a few bits and pieces in it. One thing is the convener's email. So if you want to have a one-to-one session with a convener, then please, if you've not told your facilitator already, then drop a line to the email and we'll get that set up for you. There'll also be the link to the research as well. And Evelyn, do you want to say something about the research?
There we go, unmuted. Yes, thanks very much. Thanks for allowing me to be part of this stream. And I've posted the link to the end of weekend research survey in the chat there. You'll also get this by email, as Tim's just said, and it's also on the online hub. So I really hope that you can take some time to pause and reflect on your experiences of this weekend. As we've said before, you know, your feedback is really important and really essential. So we very much look forward to hearing from you. Thanks very much.
Great, thanks very much, Evelyn. So final thing is just a few quick thank yous. So want to say thank you to Juliet for doing all of the support with all of you. Thank you to Isabel and Eleanor for their kind of seamless kind of production that's kept this all on the road. Thank you to all of the speakers and presenters who've come in for the weekend to give us the kind of benefit of their insight, and also thank you to our facilitators as well for their kind of hard work to lead the discussions. And finally, another thank you to you. I know it's been a long weekend, but hopefully you've enjoyed it, and we're looking forward to seeing you back with us in 2 weeks to look at communities and kind of continue the process of developing your recommendations. So thanks very much and enjoy your evenings.